Thank you very much, Denver. I was absolutely thrilled when I was invited to come and speak at this conference by the EAN, and I have to say it's been, my high expectations are being fulfilled, although the room has thinned out substantially after the last coffee round. It's actually great, and I insisted on being here in person rather than just being beamed in via the screen, and I think that too is paying off, certainly for me. Denver, I know I've seen you in action now today. You've been absolutely ruthless as far as timekeeping is concerned. So I'm just going to go through my presentation as quickly as possible. It's possibly a bit on the long side, but I will do my best to get through it. And you'll forgive me if I speak quite quickly in parts. I've called it Green Hydrogen in Namibia, Tackling the Difficult Questions, and you'll see why as we go through it. You'll forgive me if I start on a bit of a personal note, because I think what I have to say is best understood by where I'm coming from. So I very much see myself as an independent freelance economist, not beholden to particular government or commercial interests. I'm not employed by anyone, not by the government of Namibia, not by any of the commercial firms involved in green energy in Namibia or elsewhere. So I really think I'm about as independent as one can be. I've been following the Namibian economy now for 30 years. I arrived in Namibia from the UK back in 1991 and worked in the National Planning Commission, and I was just swapping memories with my old friend Sylvester Mbangui, who was on the stage earlier, who was still at the National Planning Commission all these years later. But in those 30 years, I've taken a very close interest in economic development here. I founded the IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research. In 2000, I helped found Insight Namibia magazine. In 2004, I produced the IPPR's Quarterly Economic Review, which you can all subscribe to free of charge. And of course, never one to miss an opportunity to plug my book launch. I'm launching a new edition of the Guide to the Namibian Economy, which I first wrote in 2009. I'll be launching that next month in September. It's now weighing in at over 700 pages. I hate to say, so I don't expect you to actually read it from cover to cover. But I see myself as an independent analyst, and therefore I do what analysts do, and that is asking the difficult questions, and sometimes even helping to answer them. So that's what I'm going to try and do today. Let me put my cards on the table very early on, though. I'd say I do believe in man-made climate change. It's definitely happening. The world needs to act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm not some sort of climate denier. I'm very supportive of what the Namibian government is trying to achieve here. And I have to say, in all my 30 years studying the Namibian economy, I have never seen government act in such a visionary, coordinated, and effective manner. And I think, in large part that's down to, yes, His Excellency the President, who's given this his political support wholeheartedly, but also down to James, I don't know if he's here in the audience still, and Mangula and their teams who have worked incredibly hard to get us where we are today, which is, of course, still only at the beginning. But I am very impressed. But, of course, enthusiasm, my enthusiasm, your enthusiasm shouldn't stop everyone from asking the difficult questions and shouldn't be blind to the challenges. And I think over the presentations we've already seen today, those challenges have been brought to the fore and expressed in a very clear way. So I'm going to ask 6 challenging questions in my presentation, and I hope this will be food for thought and also grist to the mill, where we can talk in the panel discussion more about possibly trying to answer these questions. The first question is, the absolute key question: can Namibia produce and export green hydrogen at the right price? And again, I'm shorthanding, green hydrogen could be green ammonia as well. Can we do it? Because everything else is based on that. And all the nice diagrams we saw earlier with hydrogen buses driving around the Wonderland and things, I mean, that's great, but it will not happen if we can't produce hydrogen at the right price. Okay, sorry, I'm having trouble with my button here. Right, let me see. Right, yes, okay. So, I'd say down into several building blocks, and I'm just going to go through 6 of what I think are the most important building blocks of this green hydrogen project of ours. The first is water desalination. It's been mentioned by people already. I'd say this is a building block that's relatively tried and tested. We even have experience of water desalination here in Namibia. I think we were the first or the second country in Southern Africa to have a water desalination plant. I remember the day when it was inaugurated, and very exciting it was too. So I think the water desalination part of the building blocks is relatively well understood at this stage. But then we get on to the electrolyzers. This is the key component that basically splits the water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. And I think there we're at the beginning of a very exciting phase of development globally, where electrolyzers are going to come down in cost and increase in scale. And that's exactly what we need if green hydrogen is going to become a thing. I noticed that the largest one I could find was 150 megawatts in China. But I know a lot of work is going on all around the world on this business of electrolyzer. Then renewable energy. And of course, this is where Namibia scores particularly well. Either solar PV or onshore or offshore wind on a huge scale, because remember, all these building blocks require huge amounts of energy. So we're talking about a scale that we haven't envisaged in Namibia before. But this is where Namibia really scores with its wind resources and its solar resources. Liquefaction, I think that should say, liquefaction, again, it's been mentioned before. If we're going to transport hydrogen around, because at room temperature it's a gas, you need an awful lot of volume to generate any sort of power at all. It's going to have to be liquefied to minus 253 degrees centigrade or converted to something like ammonia to be shipped around the world and traded. Now, again, that requires an awful lot of energy. And again, the technology is there, yes, but on this sort of scale, still has to be developed. Storage, how will all this hydrogen or green ammonia be stored? And then finally, how will it be transported around to create a global market with a trading price? You need to be able to move these things around. I mentioned the Suizo Frontier ship, the first ship that was specifically designed to transport liquid hydrogen, only set sail from Australia to Japan earlier this year, so we really are on the frontier of technology. So these are the main building blocks of what we're trying to do, and I'd say most of these building blocks are still represent technical challenges, and that, of course, leads to risk. If we look at costs, I've dug out, I mean, there are many, many reports you can look at. I've dug out here a chart from the IEA, the International Energy Agency, which shows, it compares costs of different types of hydrogen by different years, 2020, 2030, 2050, and you can see there's the grey hydrogen on the left. That's roughly where the costs are at the moment, sort of below $2 a kilo. But what we're interested in is renewables on the right, the green bars, and you can see that first green bar, essentially where we are at the moment in 2020, is quite a big bar. There's a huge span of cost there, but even the lowest is, we're talking about, according to this chart, $3 a kilo, so a lot higher than what you'll be paying for grey or other forms of hydrogen. So I think there's a huge cost challenge here for green hydrogen, unless we're all going to be saddled with much higher energy costs in the future, or it needs to be subsidized. I don't think that's the intention. The US has very explicitly framed this sort of moonshot program of theirs, which is the 111 program, where they want to achieve the cost of $1 per 1 kilo of hydrogen within 1 decade, and that's essentially 2030, 2031. But I think we're all trying to reach that point because cost is just so critical. Now, what gives us a lot of hope that that can be done is the next chart. And again, I've lifted this from one of the international reports, but you can get them pretty much in any of these reports. It compares the LCOEs, basically the lifetime costs of all these various renewable energies, and compares what's changed between 2010 and 2020. And you can see within that grey bar, which is the sort of fossil fuel cost range, they've called it there, that's essentially how much fossil fuels are costing at the moment. you can see that some quite dramatic of certain renewables, specifically solar PV and concentrated solar power and offshore wind, I would say those three. So those costs have come down absolutely dramatically. And they've come down for a variety of reasons. Scale is one, technology is another. And that's, I think, what gives us hope that other technologies can follow this sort of path, but it's not a given, of course. Sorry, I'm pressing it in the right direction now. All right. Okay, so that was the first question. So I think there is certainly hope that we can do it, but there's a long way to go. Question 2. Is there an important first mover advantage, or might it be better to take our time as Namibia on the green hydrogen initiative? Okay. The first thing I'd say here, first mover advantage or disadvantage. Now, in most markets, first mover does have an advantage. They take greater risks. Yes, they do the R&D, they spend money on that, they risk new products. But they do that because there is a good chance that they can win a higher price in the market as a result. And that's a sort of first mover advantage, if you like. Now, we could discuss this, but I would say we're in a rather different game in terms of green hydrogen, because it isn't a product like a luxury car or a smartphone, where you do achieve that price premium in the market if you get there first. What we're trying to do here, as I've said in the first question, is try and get to as low a price of green hydrogen as possible. That's what we're aiming for. So we're not looking for price premiums. Now, it might be that over time, price premiums can emerge. So if Namibia is a really low-cost producer and it's competing against other producers that are slightly higher cost, Namibia could, in theory, generate a premium. But I think at the moment we're all just trying to get as low as possible so that we can compete equally and commercially with those fossil fuels. So we're in a different game to most markets. And when I read the government's documents, they're very exciting, of course. They took a 4.4 billion investment in 2 gigawatts of renewable energy in production by 2026, although I see 2024 in some documents as well, which will map 9.4 billion investment in 5 gigawatts of renewable energy, 300,000 tons of green hydrogen by 2030. And I sort of find myself in a very unusual position for me. Normally I'm telling government in what I write, get a move on, let's go as fast as possible on this. I'm frustrated by the slow pace of change. I think in this case, I think the timelines might rather be the other way around. They might be a bit too ambitious. And I'm thinking, so much is still unknown. Betting on particular technologies, understanding particular markets, understanding the costs of what we're doing. Clearly, net zero by 2050 is important for the world, but so is it getting it right for Namibia rather than getting it wrong. So maybe we need to pace ourselves a little bit differently and more realistically. Of course, we're not alone in this game. I've thrown in 2 charts. You probably can't see them, but the chart on the left shows all the countries that have some sort of well-defined, articulated hydrogen strategy. And you see there are quite a few of them around. I think they're around 30 at the moment. This was a 2021 chart. On the right is a diagram of all the green hydrogen projects that were ongoing in 2021. So there's a lot going on globally. So we're not alone. We have certain advantages, but we're, if you like, competing with others as well. And we should be keeping a close eye on what's happening in those other producer countries. Question 3, can Namibia attract the investment required to realise its green hydrogen potential? I certainly think not enough has been written or said about this particular point up to now. Funding. I hear very little about funding at this stage. Maybe it's too early, but what's that word that begins with R? I don't know, Clemens? You paying attention? Well, the word I'm thinking of is risk. There's a hell of a lot of risk with everything I've said up to now. And that needs to be taken into account. I recognise we're only at the initial stages of this journey. There won't be a bankable feasibility study for at least another 2 years, possibly longer. So we're not yet at the stage where we can take a project, a costed project, to a bank and raise that funding. Remember, we're in the business of creating a whole new global industry, supply and demand. There's so many bits that have to come into place, as we've heard in the course of today. Lots of risks there. Likely to involve large sums. Again, someone's already raised this, 9.4 billion, if that's just one of the projects. That's roughly equivalent to Namibia's GDP. What we're essentially creating here is a sort of second Namibian economy tacked on to what exists already. This is huge. I've read entirely financed by Hyphen. Well, I don't want to go into the details of this, but it's likely to involve international financial institutions and long-term patient finance. Quite where exactly that will come from, I think, will emerge over time. But this is so big that the Namibian state really does have to get involved. As I said, we're creating a second economy tagged onto the existing Namibian economy. It's hard, it's so big, it's so important, it's going to be so important for national development in Namibia. It's hard to think that something like this could be completely private sector driven, managed, run. So I suspect the Namibian state will have to be involved as an equity stakeholder at some stage. How that then gets financed, I think, is an important question. I think I've read one interview where James has talked of 24% being owned by the Namibian government, but nothing was said about money. Who raises the money and who takes the risk? What happens when things go wrong? Namibia's already, sorry, this isn't working particularly well, maybe the battery's running out. Namibia's already, I would say, highly indebted. Debt to GDP in Namibia's 70% and still growing. My international credit rating has been deteriorating steadily over the past 5 years or so. So again, we're not in a strong position to borrow. And then going back to the question of cost, how profitable is this business likely to be? I don't think it's going to be like a second oil and gas business where you can make huge windfall profits. I think it's going to be much steadier, much longer term, smaller profit margins, possibly more like, I don't know, something like the water industry, if you like, rather than the more exciting up and down oil and gas industry. What does that mean for repayment terms? What does that mean for shareholders? Who gets what? Important questions. And then finally, of course, who bears the risk? Does the Namibian government bear the risk, or do the private investors bear the risk, or is it some combination of the two? Government has an important role in reducing and not increasing risk. I can't emphasize this enough. Taxation and regulation will be absolutely critical. We've heard that throughout the day. Okay, I've been very critical about this in public already, but I have to say, the Namibian Investment Promotion Act of 2016 and the draft of the NIEP that came out with it and has been revised since. I mean, I personally, and I'm just being totally honest here, if I was investing $9.4 billion US in a country and it had this on the statute book, I would think not only twice but 3 times. This has to change. It has to be crystal clear what these long-term investors are entering into when they put their money into Namibia. It might be an unpopular message, but I don't think we can get away from that. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I've already said that. And of course, Namibia must cultivate a reputation as a reliable supplier. Now, since the war in Ukraine, this issue has come to the fore even more, and this involves all sorts of geopolitics, which I don't want to go into now. But if one country is hitching its industrial future to another country, it has to be very sure that that other country is a reliable supplier. Yeah, it's as simple as that. Oops, right. Yeah. Clearly, skills are an issue, but skills take time to develop, and again, maybe a good reason why we take this a little more slowly rather than rushing it. Get the Namibians trained up so then they can run this industry rather than just bringing in foreigners. And of course, all this will help our oil and gas sector and the rest of the economy too. This is pretty much low cost, but that's the returns from this low cost investment in our international investment environment are huge. And remember, we're going to be asking the oil and gas majors to invest possibly even more than 9.4 billion over the coming years. But all this will have a good impact on the rest of the economy. I want to, we all say this is new to Namibia, it's new to the world, and that's definitely true. There hasn't been anything quite like green hydrogen in Namibia before. So I'm looking around for some sort of example of a similar sector, which I know quite well here. And what I've done here is just put a very simple table with the diamond mining sector on the left and the other mining sector on the right, and just looked at how regulations and taxation has changed over the years. And this is precisely the sort of thing I'm talking about. You can't spring nasty surprises on long-term investors. In diamond mining, that hasn't happened. We haven't done that. Maybe that's because government is a 50% shareholder in Namibia. Maybe it's for other reasons. Our diamond resource is quite an extraordinary resource. But on the mining sector, I mean, I myself, I've been paid good money to get involved in sorting out disputes between government and the mining sector, where government just gazettes a new royalty tax from one day to the next and expects that not to have an impact on the industry. Royalty taxes, windfall royalties, proposals on corporate profits tax, VAT on mining exports, withholding taxes on services, export levies, additional conditions, taxes, deductibility of royalty taxes, new taxes on dimension stones, scrapping VPZ's incentives. This is no way to treat long-term investors. And this is how, you say judge a person by what they do, but not by what they say. Words are cheap. This is what we've done over the last 30 years. And I don't think it's good enough if we're going to enter the brave new world of green hydrogen. I'm being very blunt here. Which is, of course, why they pay me the big bucks. I'm not being paid for this presentation, by the way. Question number 4. Can Namibia deliver green hydrogen to the markets that demand it? Again, this is an issue that's already been raised several times this morning. But it's about how to get... this is a map, again, pulled from one of these very, very interesting reports where green hydrogen is being used. And, of course, notable by its absence is Namibia. There's no big round blue circle over Namibia, because the green hydrogen we'll produce will be exported to other parts of the world. And I think that's a good thing, and will become an incredibly important part of the global economy. But we have to recognize there's a transport issue here. This is the Suizo Frontier picture of the ship that I mentioned earlier. Transport by specialized ship might become an option in the future, but at the moment it's early days, it's very expensive. Maybe pipelines are the answer, but up to a certain distance. Beyond that, it gets difficult. Maybe we use green ammonia, as someone has already mentioned before. Maybe there's some combination of all three mechanisms to distribute the hydrogen to where it actually gets consumed. If storage and transport costs are high enough, it may make more sense to move the industries rather than the green hydrogen and relocate certain industrial clusters to Namibia, or use Namibia as a green hydrogen refueling station. Again, ideas that have already been mentioned today. And this comes back to my question number 5. Are there industries which would make more sense to relocate to Namibia? I don't have clear answers for this, but traditionally aluminium smelters have always been built near cheap hydroelectric power, and that's sort of what might happen in the case of green hydrogen. You can imagine green steel being produced here rather than elsewhere, because this is where the green hydrogen is most cheaply available. Fertilizers, synthetic fuels, and again, people are thinking about these things already. Very, very exciting for this economy. And finally, question number 6, and I'm coming to the end of my presentation now. Can Namibia produce green hydrogen in a way that does not damage the environment? And again, our earlier session, I think, touched on this. We are talking at the moment about the Sperrgebiet down south. 2 specific areas of the Sperrgebiet at the moment, to be specific, but we know why this part of the country has been chosen. It's been chosen for the solar, the quality of the solar power available down there, the wind, and the land. And those are very good, solid reasons to choose this part of the country. But we have to recognize, as someone mentioned in the previous presentation, Sperrgebiet is fragile and ecologically highly sensitive. Minimizing environmental impact will play a key role in shaping Namibia's green hydrogen brand. We're talking about branding, we're talking about international standards, if you like. Our brand will be damaged if people know that our green hydrogen was produced through significant environmental destruction. Linked to that is how will minimizing that environmental damage add to the cost of the hydrogen we're producing? There will be a cost that has to be factored in. Maybe it's not great, but maybe it is more significant. And what happens if things are responsible? Sorry. Someone has to be responsible for site rehabilitation, for clearing up the mess, if there is a mess at the end of the day. So, that's what I have to say. 6 questions: cost competitiveness, first mover advantage, investment and investment environment, storage and transport, industrial relocation, and environmental impact. Now, just very finally, there's a lot of further information here. I do recommend that everyone interested in green hydrogen in Namibia subscribes to this incredible free newsletter. There are a lot of other reports I've listed here which are definitely worth reading. Of course, things are changing very, very quickly. But I, like possibly 90% of the people in this room, have had to come up to speed on green hydrogen very quickly over the last few years, and I found last year, and I found these documents incredibly useful to understand the industry. Thank you very much.